It's looking more and more like UN employees participated in October 7th. Israel says that 12 employees of the UN Special Aid Agency for Palestinians participated in the attack. It collected intelligence from cell phone data, interrogations, and other sensitive sources before recently presenting them to the US. The allegations are very, very serious, with the terrorists reportedly using UN vehicles and facilities during the attack. Some of the UN staff members kidnapped Israelis. Others provided logistical support for the massacre. And America and over a dozen other top donor countries suspended their funding in response. It's important to note that these are still allegations. They fired 9 of the employees right away. 2 of them were confirmed dead, and they're working on confirming the identity of the last one. The organization also launched an investigation into the matter, and top UN officials say that they're horrified. And even the Biden administration, which is hugely supportive of the UN, said that it's taking the matter highly seriously.
We haven't had the ability to investigate them ourselves, but they are highly, highly credible.
And come on, this is the UN that we're talking about. The organization is plagued by so many scandals that it's almost impossible to keep track. And in this case, we're talking about the organization's most controversial, dysfunctional body. It's called the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA. And the latest news shouldn't come as a surprise. For decades, top UN officials have turned a blind eye to the pro-terrorism activities of UNRWA. On October 7th, Hamas murdered more than 1,200 people, including 30 American citizens. The US is UNRWA's largest donor. It has sent the agency $1 billion over the past 3 years. In other words, your tax dollars almost certainly played some role in making the attack possible. So how did we get here? The UN was founded to advance the cause of peace. How did it end up assisting Hamas butchers? When it comes to UNRWA, the story goes all the way back to Israel's founding. After Israel's neighbors attacked the country on the first day of its existence, the UN created UNRWA, and it gave the agency a special authority to assist refugees created by the conflict. On the surface, that work looks pretty straightforward. UNRWA provides food, water, schooling, and other necessary goods and services to Palestinian populations across the Middle East. UNRWA says that it serves 5.9 million refugees, but are they all really refugees? The true number of people who were actually displaced by the 1948 war is less than 200,000. Most of the people that UNRWA serves don't qualify as refugees under any meaningful sense of the term. And that's the heart of the problem. It's not just a bureaucratic misunderstanding. At the core of UNRWA's very existence is the idea that millions of people who have lived elsewhere for the entirety of their lives have the right to return to Israel. UNRWA is perpetuating a dangerous myth. It's a myth that lends itself to anti-Israel sentiment, terrorism, and mass murder. UNRWA runs hundreds of schools in Gaza, and it has taught children to support terrorism. Textbooks used in UNRWA schools have praised Hitler, glorified jihadism, and expressed pro-Hamas sentiment. UN Watch has published several reports over the past decade detailing a group message chat with 3,000 UNRWA employees praising the October 7th attack as Hamas was carrying it out. One of the teachers prayed that Hamas would break Jews and their camp. Another wrote about executing Israelis. Another teacher said, "Oh, how I hate the Jews." In other words, a UN body has injected anti-Semitic and pro-genocide sentiment into Gazan schools for decades. This is one of the many reasons that we know that the UN knew about UNRWA's massive terrorism problem before the latest allegations surfaced. Another reason is that it's long been clear that Hamas exerts some degree of control over UNRWA through intimidation. In 2021, Hamas pushed out UNRWA's top official in Gaza after that individual gave an interview calling Israeli airstrikes precise and sophisticated. Protests erupted, threats were sent his way, and he had to leave Gaza. And new reporting reveals that a top UNRWA official actually had to also leave Gaza in 2015 after someone sent him a grenade in a box. What was his job? To fire UNRWA officials who were also secretly part of Hamas, and to oversee the removal of Hamas weapons from UNRWA schools in Gaza. That's why we know that UNRWA knew that at least some of its staffers were terrorists long before the latest news broke. And even though the UN denies that it knew about the Hamas tunnel system under Gaza, it knew because UNRWA knew. The official who was forced to leave Gaza in 2021 said in an interview afterward, "Many people told me through my 4 years, there's tunnels everywhere, and it's a safe assumption." But incredibly, UNRWA and the UN leadership had turned a blind eye to all of this before last month's revelations. They even went on the offensive against reporters who dared to report on the UN's links to Hamas. Back in December, an Israeli reporter interviewed a hostage who was released during the temporary ceasefire deal. That hostage was held in the attic of an UNRWA teacher. What did UNRWA do in response? The agency asked him for more information, and when he didn't cooperate with UNRWA, it said that his reporting was probably misinformation, and the agency demanded that he delete the post. This was an incredible act of attempted censorship. UNRWA and the UN have doubled down on their denials at every stage possible. Even after last month's revelations, the organization has continued to go on the offensive, with UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini saying that countries that suspended their funding of UNRWA were being immensely irresponsible. UNRWA and its allies on the far left are describing this as a form of collective punishment, where the actions of just a few bad apples are leading to punitive measures being taken against the agency as a whole. Just last week, a Norwegian member of parliament nominated UNRWA for the Nobel Peace Prize. America is already facing a lot of pressure to resume funding for UNRWA. Despite the allegations, the Biden administration has still said that the agency does critical, life-saving work. But lifting the funding pause would come with a lot of risk. The concern isn't just that there's evidence linking 12 UNRWA employees to the attack. The other Israeli findings are just as disturbing. The Israeli intelligence dossier says that as many as 1,200 UNRWA employees in Gaza might be tied to Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another terrorist group. And as many as 190 might be actual members of these groups. Hamas, PIJ, and Hezbollah are not on the UN's list of designated terrorist organizations. UNRWA is not required to submit its employees to undergo US counterterrorism screening. Is that a status quo that the US government is comfortable returning to? It's likely that in the next government spending package that Congress will prohibit any US funding from being sent to UNRWA in the future. This would prevent the Biden administration from lifting that temporary funding pause. If Congress does defund UNRWA, other organizations can step in. These include the High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the UN's agency for refugees in any other part of the world. Another leading candidate is the World Food Program, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020 under the leadership of an American executive director. But it will be considerably more difficult to end UNRWA in its entirety. Any fight within the UN to eliminate the agency will be ugly. The UN has taken outrageously anti-Israel stances before. Most UN members have long hated the country. That's why the organization's General Assembly passes more than a dozen anti-Israel resolutions every single year. And it's part of the reason why the Biden administration is unlikely to press for the total dissolution of UNRWA. But if things don't change, the US, other donors, and the UN will continue to fuel the sort of evil that Hamas unleashed on October 7th. Unfortunately, the UN isn't the only major institution that has failed to stand up to Hamas and its apologists. If you want to learn more about this, watch our next video here.